Hello, Chris Hanna once again coming at you solo. I'm going to do a hopefully quick podcast about some issues that have been bugging me in the ex-Mormon community for a long time. Been wanting to get them off the chest. One of the reasons I even made this channel is to get these things off my chest. I'm the type of person who, if I do get something off my chest, I can let it go. I'm looking forward to letting it go after I get these things out. The ex-Mormon podcast community has some royalty in it. Some of those people are John Dehlin from Mormon Stories, John Larson, who's now appearing on Mormon Stories, once was in Mormon Expression, and Lindsay Hansen Park, who I know Larson and Lindsay a little bit better than I know John Dehlin personally. However, I've been watching them for years. I've tried to put out little messages or critiques to them across the years and been shut down on it, and that's fine. They don't have to put me up. So I'm going to put myself up, and I'm going to start pointing out some of the things that have been irritating me about the ways they go about their ex-Mormon vlogging, I guess you would call it. Very recently, right before I did my first podcast, I had an interaction online with John Larson. John Larson, who appears on Mormon Stories from time to time, very recently. And I'm going to show a little bit of where that interaction ended up. So, as you can see here, we had a back and forth, and I was poking at him a little bit about his biases, his political biases that he claims to not have. Those are some of the things that I've covered on some of the other episodes. We're going to cover more of it. They're highly political, Larson and Dehlin, and that's fine, except they pretend to not be, which is one of the things that irritates me. And even though they have mentioned their politics or whatnot, there's still so much more that they smuggle in than they admit to. I was poking at them and telling them, because they keep saying that they'll have different opinions about the things that they say on the show, or that they'll address them and then they never address them. And if they do claim to address something, they'll do some sort of like nut picking, which is you pick somebody who said something stupid or is easy to deal with, or you do like one of the things I believe that happened between them and another channel, the Midnight Mormons. What happened with John Dehlin is, instead of getting to a point where he could debate them or would debate them or talk with them, they created drama and internet drama and acted like, oh, things just got too outrageous to deal with. And this is, I believe, John Larson doing it with me here. So one of the reasons I bring this up is it all going to tie in of what I want to talk about their problems with bias and epistemology are. This is a situation where I was poking at Larson. I was starting to tell him some of the things that I find to be politically charged in his Mormon Stories podcast. After a moment, I told him who I was, because he knows me. He knows me because I went to the Mormon Expression podcast for years and interacted between him. I know Lindsay Hansen Park better. I only ever really spent one extended night with John Larson. That night was on, I believe, a Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve. Lindsay Hansen Park called up me to call a couple of my friends to go play a poker game with John Larson as he was going through a divorce. She was concerned that she didn't want him alone on Christmas Eve, so he needed to have people around him. So she, in a very caring way, rounded up a bunch of people to just go be company for John Larson because he was going to be alone. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this was the night before Christmas Eve. I'm pretty sure it was Christmas Eve. I have witnesses who also believe that it was Christmas Eve. However, this is going to play into the bigger picture, trust me. When I brought it up to him to tell him who I was, because I was interacting, as you can see on the screen here, as what my name used to be, which I've changed it to my actual name now. I only had it as that because what did it matter? I wasn't anybody on YouTube, but I'll back up the things I said. So I've changed my YouTube channel to my actual name. It used to be Mr. Guy. So I was talking to him, and we were starting to interact, and then he wanted to back off the interaction and say, we should have it in person. I believe that one of the reasons they back off like that is because they don't want any of the exchange to be public, or they don't want to have to. I mean, I think a lot of the different points that I'll poke at him about, he'd probably back off of them and not be so extreme with them, but he doesn't want to do that publicly. That's my opinion, that one of the reasons he's dodging. However, in this exchange, I told him who I was. I told him who I was and where I had spent time with him so that he would know who I was, because that was the one night I spent extended time with him. So he says, I know who you are. I've never spent Christmas Eve with any people except my family and very close friends of my family. Please stay clear of me, my home, and my family. Like, he wants to bring it up like it's some sort of stalking harassment or something like that. And it's ridiculous. It's out of the box ridiculous, but it's also just another way to dodge having to deal with any sort of criticism. He's also going to probably bring up any of the other sort of typical dodges that happen when people want to deal with a criticism, because they claim they can't platform the criticism because it's just not appropriate, and which is part of their biases, which are ridiculous. It's all ridiculous. It's all bad epistemology. It's all bad evidence dealing, even though these guys live in a planet where they're trying to hold feet to the fire of all these different evidentiary things for the Mormon community. They can't. They won't hold up to themselves, even though they'll pretend and announce on their show that they will. I bring this up because I'm going to talk about something which is part of what the entire issue that I have with them and other people are. And it's not just that he's lying about the situation or pretending to not remember the situation, or maybe he really forgot. I can extend him that courtesy. It's the null hypothesis. It's actually having the null hypothesis. It's actually dealing with when you're learning and figuring out about situations, trying to understand that when you're trying to find truth in this world, finding something that is explicitly outwardly correct one way or the other is very difficult to find out. I'm a human resources director. I've been a human resources director for, I always say 20 years because it feels like 20 years. I think it's like 17 years. I forget off the top of my head. I'll just always throw out 20 years because it was 20 years ago I was in school. It's 20 years ago that I got out of school, and have been in human resources ever since. I moved up to a manager position within my first year, and I've been part of investigations ever since, for some very large companies, some smaller companies. I've been a part of many, many, many he said, she said investigations. So I've put you here in the middle of a he said situation. I say this night happened. John Larson says this night didn't happen. Who should you believe? You take the null hypothesis. And the same thing that we take when we do due process, due diligence, whenever we're investigating any situation. Am I bringing this up because I care so much that he's lying about this? Very few people probably saw this exchange. I ultimately don't care at all. I knew from the start when I was poking these guys, I was actually surprised he interacted with me here, because I thought for a while that they'd seen me before and that they'd shadow ban me, or they weren't going to ever address me, or maybe I was just getting lost down, among thousands of voices or whatever. But this interaction showed me that they were hearing me and that they really didn't want to have the interactions they were claiming to want to have. No big deal with that. What I'm talking about here is he's got this claim that this never happened. I have the claim that it did happen. The past little while on Mormon Stories, John Dehlin covering some pretty interesting podcasts about sexual assault survivors, bringing in these people who talk about situations that they had in their life and using them as a case against reasons why the Mormon church supposedly doesn't do a good job in dealing with these situations. I'm not saying they do. I'm not saying they don't. I'm not saying these situations happened. I'm not saying they didn't. Innocent until proven guilty. It's part of our ostensibly shared liberal beliefs, conservative and liberals alike, across the past few hundred years of the citizens of the United States of America. The presumption of innocence, part of our legal jurisprudence, comes from England. It's one of the cornerstones of what this country is. It's one of the things that's been on the chopping block by activists like Larson, and I would say Dehlin. There's different levels of how active people are in this, and there's different levels of, I would call, sneakiness about how much they're for this or not. One of the things that comes with the presumption of innocence in the United States of America, as you can maybe read here, is that when people go to trial, this may be very basic and remedial for very many people, but for other people it's not. When you go to trial, people aren't declared innocent or guilty. They're considered guilty or not guilty. And that's depending on how much evidence there was to show or have different people come to the belief something happened or did not happen. This precept is really a cornerstone of liberalism. It's actually a miracle that any civilization ever landed on this at all, because you don't have to do very much of a thought experiment to figure out how, if you take any sort of other angle at this stuff, things get wild. We've all been able to see a little bit of that happen. Maybe some of us haven't paid attention very well to it. I've got examples of it, of how this got wonky in the Me Too era. And it got excessive and difficult. But you know what? This is coming up a lot in the ex-Mormon community too. We aren't good at the null hypothesis. Postmodernists would say that we can't take the null hypothesis. We can only have biases. These are one of the epistemologies that I will poke at them that they aren't good at, while they stand on a rock of truth whenever they're trying to take on Mormonism, straight empirical evidentiary truth, until we push on their activism. And then we push on their activism, and then suddenly it's all relativistic. This, as of right now, and there's activists who are pushing on it legally to change it. That's one of the main things that I myself feel I need to speak out to stand up against, is activists who want to change liberal precepts like this into things that are illiberal. They're outwardly illiberal. They say they're illiberal. I'm going to make that case much more in other times, in other areas, even with other podcasts. But one of the reasons this thing is so important, well, not just important, I won't go into all the philosophy of that. However, you see right here, as of right now, even under the UN and the United States, the presumption of innocence is a human right. I think it's a good axiomatic position for a civilization, or for any sort of observer of any situation, for anybody to take. Is John Larson lying about the night that I had? Well, let's presume he's innocent. You should presume he's innocent. Maybe he's made a mistake. Maybe he doesn't remember. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe I'm lying. But am I a liar? You should presume I'm innocent until you see evidence, until you have more evidence. Even after some evidence, you might start questioning it or not. But as any sort of third-party person, a juror on any sort of these issues, the position that you should take is the null hypothesis. Changing your opinion based on evidence is the best position that we have to take right now. There's many who outwardly argue against this in academia right now, and those concepts have spread to many different places. Maybe some of those criticisms are good criticisms. Well, I get into Michel Foucault. I don't think Michel Foucault was 100% wrong about some of those things. The only problem with the postmodernists that I have is that it's endless in their view. And in my view, when it's true, it's true. It's not. Evidence. There's evidence against their position always being true, but sometimes it's true. On that night with John Larson, I recall getting into a discussion with him about this Blackstone formulation, and John Larson waved it off. It was one night, we were chit-chatting about poker. We were chit-chatting about Me Too stuff. And I brought up to him the Blackstone ratio formulation. That's this concept. And it's one of the cornerstones of what English jurisprudence is. One of the things our current civilization, as is agreed upon, is set upon. It's better that 10 guilty people escape than that one innocent person suffers. That might be difficult to grasp and hard to handle and hard to sort out. But you need to think about, if you're the person who, and you're part of a system. There's so much talk about systems nowadays. They want to act like if guilty people are guilty, the system's part of that guilt. However, the system, I would say, isn't guilty until it is now coming down on an innocent person. Now the system is the perpetrator for real. So on one of these recent podcasts, so on this recent episode where this gentleman here talks about his claim of a sexual assault from his own grandfather, does a lot to try to present his own credibility and whatnot. He could be completely credible. His grandfather's not here to defend himself. Take the null hypothesis. You should take the null hypothesis. Doesn't mean this guy doesn't have a right to make his case, but you're not hearing the other side of the case. As somebody with 20 years in this stuff, I promise you, not one time when I go and do investigations on a situation, I've done many, not one time does it just stay clear all the way down. There is no clarity. And that's not saying that he's not telling the absolute truth of what he remembers and what he went through. However, null hypothesis, we don't know. However, let me play here what John Dehlin said as a starting point for how you should take hearing about sexual allegations, sexual assault allegations.
And really quickly, for those who, there's always a problem with believing victims. And one of the things I had to educate myself about is very few people ever make up. I mean, false reports do exist, false accusations do exist, but the percentage, the upside of falsely accusing someone is so small, and the downside is so massive that we should all have a bias to start by believing people who claim to be victims. So that's what I've come to learn, and that's my position now. Not believe every victim every single time, but start by believing.
He made sure to get in there, not believe every single victim every single time. He had to make sure to get that one in there, which we all would have to get that in there, because we all would hope for Blackstone's formulation when we get accused, right, John? So he says the starting point is to start with bias. Let me take a look here real quick. This is Christina Hoff Sommers. Let's see what she has to say about that.
Myth 2. Women almost never lie about rape. No more than 2% of rape charges turn out to be false. Rape crisis activists often urge us dogmatically, believe women, always believe what women say. Now, they do this for a reason. They're reacting to a long history where victims were routinely disbelieved and blamed because of their choice of clothing or their sexual history. But the answer to bad old practices is not bad new practices. As Kathy Young has noted in an excellent discussion in Slate, the myth of the lying woman has been replaced by the myth of the woman who never lies. Well, why replace one myth with another? Now, of course women lie, not because they're women, but because they're human. And human beings lie, especially about sex. Now, women make false accusations for different reasons. I mean, some do it because they want to explain away an embarrassing sexual encounter, or sometimes they're disturbed and they're seeking attention or sympathy or revenge. Sometimes they've taken one too many feminist theory seminars and they've come to believe that a drunken or regretted sexual encounter constitutes a felony rape. The claim that 2% of rape accusations are false, that's unfounded. It seems to have started with Susan Brown Miller's 1975 Feminist Manifesto Against Our Will. Other statistics for false accusations range from 8 to 43%. But these studies also have flaws. The truth is we have no idea what the right number is. It may be unknowable. I mean, it's hard to define what we mean by a false accusation. Is it a case where the police refuse to pursue a claim because of too little evidence? I mean, that doesn't prove that it's false. On the other hand, it would be wrong to assume that just because someone is found guilty and sent to jail, that means the charge was legitimate. We know that many men have been found guilty of rape and later exonerated. I mean, think of the high school football star Brian Banks, who served 5 years in jail. And afterwards, his accuser admitted she fabricated the accusation. And recently, we've seen dozens of high-profile campus rape cases revealed to be born of false accusations. The bottom line, false accusations are nearly impossible to define, let alone quantify. We can't know for sure how common they are, but we do know they happen far too often.
So the flip end of that percentage that she never mentions there is that the people who actually get convicted of rape too, and this isn't like a good percentage either, is somewhere around the same percentage. The percentage of people who are convicted of a rape or a sexual assault is the same amount as those who get caught in a lie. But even all of those, it's all shady. It's all middle ground. It's all, I mean, there's probably a few cases on either side that probably we could get pretty universal agreement that this was absolutely a lie. We have a confession. We have hard video evidence, one way or the other. But the truth of the matter is most of this is in the hazy gray middle area. Some of it you have maybe more or less. And I think all of our civilization, if we've been watching the news at all the past several years, if you really actually look into any sort of situation as best as you can, you'll find out there's all sorts of shady middle ground in situations that you thought were absolutely clear. I remember I brought up Christina Hoff Sommers to Lindsay Hansen Park once, and she wrote her off, said I can't listen to her because she appeared on PragerU once. This is a liberal lady, left-leaning, but she appears on one channel, and there's a guilt by association that happens with ideological people. But you should take the null hypothesis that that interaction never happened between me and Lindsay, because it's just me claiming it. So let's get into some nitty gritty here. This is another podcast that Dehlin did with a sexual abuse survivor. Now, part of what Dehlin is doing when he's bringing on these survivors, he's trying to make a case against the church. He has a bias against the church. He wants to take the church down. I'm not saying the church was great or always great or in any situation was great or bad. I'm sure it was great or bad. I'm sure any institution sufficiently large, like say, the Thrive organization ever got large enough that it had tens of thousands of different people in it. Guess what's gonna happen? There's gonna be allegations. There's gonna be some of them that are true. There's gonna be some of them that are false. That's what happens with large entities. You can't keep the snake out of the garden. But they'll get to find that out, as the atheism movement got to find that out. I have a clip on that too here in just a second. So let's take a look here. I'm gonna look at that atheism movement post really quick. I brought this up in one of the other podcasts first. So this is David Silverman. This was the head of a CEO of a 501c3, like one John Dehlin. There was a large movement back in the early 2000s of atheism and atheism conventions. David Silverman here was the organizer. I don't even know what you call the head of, I don't know if it's a CEO or whatever. It's the same thing that, say, one John Dehlin is for Mormon Stories Foundation. He's the head of a 501c3. He got caught in a sexual relation, what he claims was a consensual relationship with somebody who was trying to work at that organization. He got removed. He later got removed from the organization, and the organization fell apart because it really was based around his work and his activity. Now, David Silverman, I've continued to listen to on some other podcasts. He claims this whole thing went down wrong or incorrectly, but you can see here that he admits to having the consensual sexual relation, in his words, with an employee of the organization, or someone who ostensibly could have been an employee of the organization.
And he's admitted as much in a recent interview.
I want to state this. Rose has a legitimate beef with me. I shouldn't have had sex with an attendee at a convention. I was the president of an organization, and after she asked me for a job, and I knew that there was, and I made it okay in my brain because I said no, but I really should have not. There was a power differential there. There was a power dynamic issue there. I get it. She said that she was afraid that I would do something to her if I didn't.
So that power dynamic issue is something that is called, for your little HR lesson of the day again, a quid pro quo harassment. You may have heard it in your own company's harassment training. Let me take a look at that. So that situation that he was talking about is what is called a quid pro quo. For you people who've been through the HR training, this is coming from your friendly HR director here. What is the meaning of a quid pro quo? Quid pro quo is a phrase in Latin translated into English, meaning is something for something. It's used to describe a situation where one person does something for another person and expects the other person to do something for them in return. In terms of sexual harassment, it means that someone offers something work-related in exchange for a sexual favor. It doesn't just mean that I offered you a job if you gave me sex. There's so many different ways that things actually become a quid pro quo. Like if you're just the head of an organization and you're having a relationship with somebody who you possibly could have the power of giving a raise to, you've got a quid pro quo situation. If it's the opposite, the person's afraid they're not going to get something because they don't have that same opportunity of a sexual, or they aren't given that opportunity to say no, or they feel afraid to say no, or they weren't advanced because they said no, is a quid pro quo. It could be quid pro quo from a third party complaining about it. Somebody sees this person sleeping with that person, and that person's the boss of the organization, they're going to favor that person. There's a lot of different ways where this stuff can play out. You don't get to say it's not a quid pro quo just because you've announced to somebody, hey, this isn't a quid pro quo. We're going to have sex, but this isn't going to affect your job at all. It doesn't work like that. The simple insinuation there that you have that power over them makes it a quid pro quo. Well, this whole entire thing blew up the atheist conventions of the 2000s. That's a quid pro quo. This is just something to set it up. This person who John Larson brought on to talk about the sexual harassment and how well the church organization deals with it, this was this person's father who had sexually harassed her, and Dehlin's doing his best to try to change it into something that is the church's fault or their responsibility. However, she mentions this person. She mentions this person as somebody who helped her.
You actually had an episode, I think it was Matt Long, who was from Arizona. I remember listening to that episode and I felt seen and heard, because I remember him saying, you don't ask the victim if they want authorities involved. Like they're the victim, they're usually very young. And he nailed so many things that I was just like, oh my gosh, if we had more people who understood the situation like he explained it on that episode, it was so empowering for me. There were times that when I was listening to it, that I would just break down crying because I was like, oh my gosh, he gets it.
All right. Okay, so who is Matt Long? Matt Long is a person who was a participant on this podcast, Infants on Thrones. Pretty good podcast in the ex-Mormon community. I especially like Brother Jake. Guy was awesome, still awesome. I don't know if he's around or not. I know he had some health issues. I especially liked him. Glenn Oslin's pretty good too. I don't got very many beefs with Infants on Throne. However, there was one episode where they're talking about Louis C.K. and they had Lindsay Hansen Park on. I made a comment on that very video on here, but they came down on Louis C.K. as if Louis C.K.'s situation was a quid pro quo. One of the issues I always had with the Louis C.K. incident is people tried to finagle it into a quid pro quo, just saying that because he is a person of power, a person who is a high-level comedian, that those situations were quid pro quos. Almost all of the incidences, I think all of them with Louis C.K. happened before he had his major boom of fame in the 2007s. And he had situations where, yeah, he was being gross and inappropriate. And he was asking if he could do inappropriate things in front of them. But in the situations that he was in, there was never a situation where he was the boss of that person. And talking about it like he was somebody who had an option to give them an increase or a decrease, but they fudge it out. There's this concept creep that's saying just because he's a famous person now, and he did that all that time back then, there's a industry-wide quid pro quo happening with Louis C.K. No, it's ridiculous. Sure, sexual harassment you could call it hostile work environment if they were working in the same place. But if he didn't have that power over the person, it was not quid pro quo, which we really wanted to try to make it quid pro quo. However, Tom Long on this, he is somebody who's very active with police forces and cases of sexual assault in police forces. Some of what he does is really, really good, although I do believe that he is somebody who buys into this Duluth model. If you read about this Duluth model very much starts from a bias. It pushes an entire issue. If you see the criticism of it here, it starts from a bias, and it purposely kind of takes a dump on null hypothesis and evidence, and starts from a bias that men are the perpetrators. Most common batterer intervention program used in the United States. And it does not start from the null hypothesis. So it sucks, but I'll get off that for now. But, well, we can say that Matt Long is probably not starting from the null hypothesis when he dropped this video here.
My name's Matt Long. I'm a trial attorney, a husband, a father, an entrepreneur, and a philanthropist. I have a long family and personal history with Mormons. Mormon is a broad term to describe many different groups, sects, ideologies, and identities that have some connection to Joseph Smith Jr., the first Mormon. Some of the largest and well-known modern sects of Mormons include the Community of Christ, a church started by Emma Smith, Joseph's first wife, based on the rejection of polygamy. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a church started by Brigham Young, headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. This organization is a large corporate conglomerate with a man named Russell M. Nelson as the symbolic figurehead. There's also the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, headquartered on the border of Arizona and Utah. This church is currently led from a Texas prison by a man named Warren Jeffs. The Brighamite and Warren Jeffs branches of Mormonism claim polygamy as a spiritual doctrine. Over the last 10 to 15 years, there's emerged a new sect within Mormonism, a secular branch of Mormonism that's made up of many religious refugees with some connection to Joseph Smith and Mormonism. These refugees find common ground through their disbelief or separation from Mormon religions. These refugees find community through social media, discussion boards, podcasts, and in-person get-togethers and conferences. These individuals identify as ex-Mormon and are often very critical of Mormon theology and Mormon social practices. This new secular branch of Mormonism has influencers as leaders. These influencers use social media and podcasts to attract followers and ask for donations. Between 2012 and 2019, I considered myself a part of the ex-Mormon community of religious refugees and worked pretty closely with many of the ex-Mormon leader influencers. I was part of a now cringe-inducing podcast that didn't, until very recently, ask for donations. We were a group of guys that were trying to process our Mormon experience and doing our best to navigate our own humanity outside the religious paradigm. One of the most influential podcasters in the ex-Mormon world is a man named John Dehlin. One of the last podcast episodes I produced for my silly little podcast was in October of 2018, and I was critical of John Dehlin. This criticism was based on the multiple reports of misconduct from good people who worked for John. The people that worked for him reported financial and sexual impropriety and misconduct, which called into question John's honesty. One of the people I referenced was a person that worked extremely close with John. She went by the pseudonym Rosebud.
Okay, so that's Matt Long there, the person that I kind of can't believe that he let the reference go on his on that episode. I'm pretty sure that person making the claim was not aware of the backstory, because this was released before that episode was released. Kudos to John Dehlin for leaving it on there, but he knew and knows very well that Matt Long is very critical of the same types of allegations that have come against John Dehlin. What do I think of these allegations? I listened to this whole entire podcast. I actually knew of and heard of some of those claims myself before. I've been around the community long enough too. I heard about them before any of this ever came out, John Dehlin. I also do know that from my whole entire life experience that the best position to take on these things is the null. I take the null. Although I listen to this whole entire thing, that's evidence. You start building up evidence in the situation to find out what's true or not. Some people land on the side of thinking that you're probably totally innocent in all this and that person's inventing it. Other people land on the side of thinking that you did a quid pro quo as bad, if not the same type of thing that got David Silverman removed from those large atheist conventions. It's he said, she said. It's 100% he said, she said. There's not really anybody, unless there's some sort of text message or something in between. They try to use this forensic interview to try to show it to be like a proof. It's still just he said, she said. Maybe that's one of the ultimate reasons why Dehlin's never been removed or been able to be removed. Maybe it's because he can't tell one way or the other. There's never been a confession or never been any proof beyond he said, she said. Well, Why am I bringing this up? Well, am I going to try to like drag Dehlin in through the dirt and like, you know, just by bringing something up, it kind of shows. We brought up through that whole atheist convention world, Flip and I brought up all the different accusations that have come out against almost every single kind of popular atheist speaker over the years. There's been endless amounts of them. Not every single one of them were sexual in nature, but they've all had somebody come after them. I do believe that's something that does happen to anybody who gets into a position of power or of public notoriety. But do you, John Dehlin, offer this same null hypothesis to people who you have a bias against? No, you do not. You don't at all. And it's honestly where the start of the end of me even being able to handle watching Mormon Stories happen with me. There, around the time when this all initially came out, I came on to John Dehlin's, you know, it's just some thread somewhere on his podcast and other places defending his due process and due diligence and all that sort of stuff against someone like Matt Longhorn. But I defended that you got to have evidence, and you got to have evidence that's beyond he said, she said. And that's the Blackstone formulation of this world. If we go around doing the other thing, we saw what started happening in the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement, you might have got one or two predators, but you got a lot of innocent people worked into the middle of it. Glenn Greenwald's just been one of the best, if not the best journalist. Anybody can go bad, anybody can start getting biased, but has there ever been somebody who's just across the board, just honest, even if it's against what his party affiliates are into? Jimmy Dore is not too bad either, but because these are both lefties who I follow as honest people. Matt Taibbi is another one, unbelievably honest reporters, left-wing reporters. And I say I back away from the left wing now, although I consider myself largely liberal up until the Brett Kavanaugh case. When the Brett Kavanaugh case happened, when I read and looked into that, I was already starting to see just a bit too much insanity in the world of left-wing accusation mobs. But when I read into the Brett Kavanaugh case, I just was flabbergasted at how much, especially with all of my experience in this world, of how much there was nothing there. The Christine Blasey Ford, her testimony and all the lies surrounding the different claims she made, not just on the day of the hearing. It's unbelievable that we put that up, especially for something that happened 30 years ago, ostensibly when the guy was a teenager. We say, well, it's a job interview. Due process is a part of job interviews, you knuckleheads. Come on. When that whole incident happened, I had very recently defended John Dehlin and his due process. Well, right after that happened, he started coming out with these types of posts. One of the first things I saw was him just getting down in front of this little kangaroo court with his sitting down and watching this important kangaroo court moment in our nation's history. Then he comes out afterwards saying, boy, oh boy, I sure do believe this Christine Blasey Ford, because I'll summarize this whole thing up. You can kind of read it right there. But his ultimate point is that, well, she seemed honest by the feeling of it, and he seemed belligerent because he was upset about it. This was right after I defended his due process. Sometime later, he came out saying stuff like, boy, I feel bad because I once supported Bill Clinton. It's just like all of a sudden getting all the right cathedral-like positions. That's a Mencius Moldbug term for all the people who just follow what the media tells them their opinion should be. This is him coming out with a statement about stalkers and people making up lies about him and his sexual assault and all that sort of stuff, and taking a picture with his wife to make sure that we all know that he's honest and sincere and all that sorts of stuff. Blackstone formulation for me, not for thee, so that sort of thing really irritated me. Talking about the belligerence, you saw on his post that he thought the belligerence was something that proved that Christine Blasey Ford was correct and Kavanaugh was incorrect. And you see this hypocrisy by Matt Damon, who did a famous impersonation of that hearing where a complete kangaroo court was dragging Kavanaugh's name through the mud.
Same claim today to me, I'd be scorched earth. I don't care if it costs me $10 million to fight this in court with you for 10 years. Mm-hmm. You are not taking my name from me. Mm-hmm. You are not taking my name and my reputation from me. I've worked too hard. I've worked too hard for it. Yeah. and I earned it, and you can't just blow me up like that.
Let me tell you this. I'm going to start at an 11. I'm going to take it to about a 15 real quick.
It's just awesome. Someone has amnesia.
Yeah, someone has amnesia. Amnesia is a big thing that just made me fall right off the Mormon Stories bandwagon, John Dehlin. But not enough that I still believe in due process and the null hypothesis. You can be an idiot, you still get innocent until proven guilty. Yeah, it brings it up all the time. It's one of the things I mentioned. It drives me nuts each time. There's so much about this that's just so oblivious. It's oblivious that he's putting on these people who are making accusations about people who are unable to defend themselves, using them as tools to make his case against the Mormon Church for his ends. There's a lot in these podcasts where he's really advocating, as Matt Long might have said, that you should be turning to him and his organization or his type of people for help of getting along and making your way in this world, and not an organization like the church. But he'll just drop things like this in there all the time.
And then,
and I guess it's not, I mean, Brett Kavanaugh, but even Joseph Biden had accusations of inappropriate.
He did. And I've struggled with that. And
it transcends politics.
Yes.
It transcends religion.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they mentioned Joe Biden. Well, it's amazing that the left wing can have sexual harassment allegations too. I can't believe that. But that's some of the stuff that Glenn Greenwald brings up here. You see all these people who are the same ones who jumped on the Me Too bandwagon to just shred Brett Kavanaugh up, immediately take the other side to the point of attacking the woman who made the claims against Joe Biden when there's way better evidence. It's still not perfect evidence. She says that it happened in a certain time frame, around the time frame that Joe Biden was leading the hearings of Anita Hill against Clarence Thomas, and that sexual kangaroo court. A lot of people don't know that Breitbart, watching the kangaroo court of Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, was what the moment that radicalized him the other direction was the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas situation. I'm not saying I'm Breitbart, I'm not that right wing, but the moment that I just saw that this is just, I'm done with it. I'm never voting for any Democrat ever again who participated in this. Was the Brett Kavanaugh trial, because it was just unbelievable. It was unbelievably bad evidence. The same way that the third party independent prosecutor who reviewed the entire thing said there's not even anything to start on here. That's how I view it too, as somebody who's put together investigations my whole life. All of her witnesses said no and turned on her and said no, this isn't, I don't recall any sort of this thing happening. Even the situation they talked about, you can't even understand for sure if that was for sure some sort of assault, that he threw her on a bed and was laughing. She couldn't bring a knife, she couldn't bring up a place, her friends wouldn't back up that the night ever happened. Nobody else said it happened. And then the media brought up even more insane allegations from other people that they backed off them because they turned out to be absolutely outrageous. That whole entire thing was just ridiculous. It was ridiculous that it was being brought up and brought into his life. And one of the reasons they feel that they can do it and they feel that they should be able to do it is an ends justify the means utilitarian take on this stuff, which is part of the problem of the whole entire activist wing of everything. Ends justify the means. As soon as ends justify the means, truth goes out the window. All of your activism, all your ends justify the means activism, the Lynn, Larson, Lindsay, it can't hold up to hard truth. You're going to fudge truths when you guys do that stuff. That's just how it is. And sometimes you know you're doing it and say ends justify the means. Here's Glenn Greenwald pointing out, that they completely flipped, and just the lady who accused Biden, there was a proof that her mom had called in about it to a television program somewhere around the same time frame, talking about it. However, you can still say down at the end that it was he said, she said situation. Now, some people say there's probably something in the archives about it, which Biden did not want those archives released. Some people say it was for this, maybe it was for other stuff. You don't know. The end of it all too is that you can't tell. It's he said, she said with Biden. But if you have a bias on one side or the other, I can't stand Biden. Like Biden, I think Biden is just a complete for sale piece of crap. And I think you could make a left wing or a right wing take on that. That's my take on the guy. And I'm not right wing or left wing. You can call Trump a piece of crap. All politicians are pieces of crap. But I mean, that's just pretty par for the course. This situation with Biden, still all I can take is the null hypothesis. There's no proof one way or the other. There's just he said, she said. You can't alter the course of all of history because you don't have any sort of evidence of something. This doesn't mean, the null hypothesis doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that I don't believe the person. It doesn't mean that I do believe the person. You're an adult. An adult should be able to grasp the concept of taking the null hypothesis. You can even lean one way or the other and say, I bet you it would be this way, I bet you it would be the other way. But how you act in the world should be from the null hypothesis. You can't know the truth of the situation. Someday when we're all up at the pearly gates and we get on God's Google, we can all look it up and find out for sure what happened one way or the other at each one of these situations. But until then, most of them are just going to be in big, weird gray areas unless there's better evidences or proofs.
They don't believe in due process. They find people guilty all the time. Look at what they're doing to Matt Gaetz now. I'm not saying Matt Gaetz is, not guilty. He may be guilty of everything that he's being accused of and more. But thus far, there's been no evidence presented of any kind, and they have him convicted and locked up as a pedophile. The whole Me Too movement was about destroying people based on accusation.
Glenn Greenwald's been on it with a lot of this different stuff. One of the main reasons why I did not like Biden is because he was one of the persons who backed one of the largest legislations in the world called Title IX. Title IX brought in these harassment situations in colleges and universities, and it took away the due process in those universities. It basically stripped it all down to saying that if there's an accusation, it's real, and left people in no other position than to do that. And it's so irritating to me because Biden got made president and is talking about putting these Title IX, the Title IX stuff got reeled back in by who was the head of education during the Trump era that everybody hated so badly, but she was absolutely correct in undoing those Title IX extremities of saying that there had to be better evidence because there's multiple situations where different guys got kicked out of colleges. Look up the mattress girl situation. The mattress girl situation was a whole entire saga of this girl who walked around campus with a mattress about claiming that she got raped by a guy. That guy ultimately was able to finally sue that college for all sorts of money because the whole entire accusation was proven and demonstrably false. That was one of the scenarios where you were able to get a scenario. It's not false that they didn't have sexual relations. It was false that he had endless amounts of text messages of her showing that it was all consensual before and after. She made a whole entire doctoral thesis, I think, off of it, carrying her mattress around to try to make a big scene over sexual relations that she regretted. And there's so many of those different scenarios. It got unreal. And do you want to know what? If you want to say somebody who there's like systemic disparity in who gets affected by these things, those things happened, like the Banks situation, that guy Banks who had a promising NFL career and then was in jail for 5 years on a false accusation, which we know is false because the person confessed to it. The NFL ended up paying him some money there. It was really nice of them to do that. But there's, you have to judge the individual. You have to judge the situation. You have to have evidence. You can't just go off of the claims. Joe Biden, off of his Title IX setups, maybe he could have been president under the Title IX setups. He couldn't have graduated from a college. The accusation that was made against him, he would have had his transcripts withheld and he would have been kicked out of the college for the accusations against him, his own legislation. Because they were good enough. They were good enough to kick him off of college campus, maybe not convict him and throw him in a prison, but come on. There's this bunch of Democrats defending Biden after going off their rockers about Kavanaugh when there's more evidence for the Biden situation than there was for the Kavanaugh situation. They didn't even want to hear her, give her hearing, give her time. Maybe it wasn't the exact same scenario, whatever. But just the absolute jump on the other side, hypocrisy is just, it's brain busting. So all the way back in, if we look at back here at John Dehlin saying he believed Christina Blasey Ford, Kavanaugh should have acted to give him proof against these outrageous claims that just had terrible evidence behind them is his proof of why he should lead Blasey Ford. You can see here that he didn't sit by idly and just say, "Oh boy, gee willikers, I sure understand and believe women. I trust her." And it's so funny when you watch those Democrats like Biden when he got confronted with those sorts of things in the debates, and he's like, "I believe her. She's just lying." And how your stupid slogans over the years that took a dump on the liberal precepts that we all live under to have a civil society, how much they blow up in your face when suddenly they're coming at you and you're wanting them for you. But let's see if Brett Kavanaugh should have been less belligerent.
All sorts of sexual allegations that have no basis in truth. So I'm getting smeared all the time. So am I aware that of one person filing a nonprofit? There are allegations of sexual impropriety with Bob and his nonprofit. If you can constantly, year after year, drudge up negative associations, even if there's no validity to the claims, what many people do is, but and again, no credibility to the allegations of sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, zero credibility. Again, I'm not perfect. I have had to learn how to deal in this space, and I have made mistakes, in my life as I've tried to work through, my own traumas with leaving the Mormon Church and the impact of that on my marriage. But I'll just say it now, zero truth to any of these allegations.
So that's a whole entire podcast where he goes defending himself with his money. It's not just that situation. It's a lot of the different complaints about him. And he had to do a separate one the next day because the first day, they called this one the decaffeinated version of it, because the first day he got, well, I'd say Brett Kavanaugh belligerent about the accusations coming against him. I understand that, John Dehlin. If you feel that you're being unfairly accused of something, belligerent seems normal to me. My epistemology is not based off of how belligerent a person is or not when they're getting kangaroo courted. You did your whole week on street epistemology, what you guys go off of in your different sloganeering across the world of the things that you're supposed to believe based on biases and these postmodernist theories that I am going to get into more. We have to get into more. They're always a nightmare to break down because it's like they're the whole world wide and an inch deep, and it's really impossible to get into breaking them. But what they do is they charge and attack and push on epistemology and evidence. There's things called data justice and hacking and all these sorts of different issues that left-wing nuttos are taking giant dumps on truth. And one of the problems with it is I never see you guys stand up to it probably because you know the way that you'll get attacked or get slandered or get thrown in the garbage for things like this, unless you just keep holding on to if you keep saying, well, I'll be belligerent, or not belligerent, I'll be a smearer or a kangaroo quarter of Kavanaugh, maybe they'll give me some leave and pass too, which has been part of the whole entire game, as Glenn Greenwald has pointed out. So these guys just think it's outrageous that people like Kwaku and the Midnight Mormons talk about it or bring it up or meme out different things, and I don't see an ounce of it that's not kind of the same way that you guys go after and attack and charge at the church. So it's like every single thing about all this stuff is like, I'd call it's like what Marcuse called repressive tolerance. It's like everything you do is evil and bad and violence, and everything I do is well, the concept of it is right-wing speech is violence and left-wing violence is speech. And the disparity in the treatment, the hypocrisy is the point. It's often not just the simple fact that there's a hypocrisy there and they're too biased to see it. I very often think and believe that showing that this counts for you but not for me is part of the whole agenda. So let me wrap it all the way back around here to the initial thing I talked about. Did this night happen or did it not happen? Well, I don't know. Well, I mean, I thought it was Christmas Eve. I'm pretty sure it's Christmas Eve. I brought a girl who later became my girlfriend that night. I was able to ask her. We're not dating anymore. We're still very friendly. If she remembers that night, she gave me a response. This is her response. Remember that time I picked you up on Christmas Eve to go play poker with a depressed guy? Yeah, of course. Well, I think you won. That's true too. Who won the poker match? I won the poker match. I've got a lot of experience with poker though. I lived in Vegas for years and used to play tournaments all the time. But yeah, I won it. It's Christmas Eve, right? Yeah, I believe so. I remember him feeling lonely and alone for the holidays. So she remembers that whole night. She says, it's imprinted in my mind. Whoa, that kind of sounds indelible in the hippocampus, something that Christine Blasey Ford said. But, you know, no hypothesis. Well, I got 2 witnesses now. Then my friend Flip was also there that night. Yeah, it was Christmas Eve. He's full of swear. I can't believe that he's being such a liar about this. But so evidence starts to build. Am I telling the truth or is he telling the truth? Well, I got a couple pieces of evidence now. Maybe you can go a little bit beyond the null hypothesis or whatnot, but still, especially if you have a bias, you know, you might believe Larson over me or what's it matter? None of this matters. It's all just he said, she said. Even with a couple pieces of evidence, you can't know for sure. You don't know for sure. Even me that night, I think, well, maybe it was the night before Christmas Eve. We still would have made it Christmas Eve after midnight, but maybe it was the night before. Maybe John Larson doesn't remember. Maybe he's outright lying. Why would he want to lie about it? Because he doesn't, maybe it made it look like we used to be bestest buddies or something like that, which wasn't my point at all. But the point of it is people you view as honest people who are just there truth telling and telling the truth, they get fudgy with the facts. They get fudgy with the facts for a bias or for a reason or for whatever sort of a purpose they might have, you know, as a means to an end. Maybe I don't have like a good way to specifically wrap it all up, but my point is, and the reason I'm coming at them is for these types of biases that their community has just gotten so insular and so over the top and so accusatory of what the Mormon world is, putting up these things John Dehlin is every single day of all these like sexual situations in the Mormon church, and you do not know the whole stories of these situations. Maybe some of them are 100% true, maybe they aren't, but Dehlin's using them for his tool. Larson has his angles and biases. Lindsay Hansen Park has her angles and biases. We can do a postmodern deconstruction of all of their biases, but usually with those types of worlds, if you have the right politics for the masses, for the people, for the community, that means you have some sort of higher access to truth as being a voice for the oppressed and oppressors. John Larson's going to try to say the reason they can't platform us is because we're going to say some things that are bigoted, so he can't platform us. The only reason he's going to say something that's bigoted, like for example, is like me talking right now about you can't just jump on the believe all women bandwagon. Oh, that's bigoted. That's sexist bigoted. That's the extent. That's the extent of the accusations that's always going to come out of his pie hole. That if you're somebody who wants to stand on the truth of a situation, Flip will bring up a lot of times that he studied a lot of different things about policing. And if you want to stand up and say, hey, some of your certain stats and data on this policing issue aren't exactly true. Oh, dare you speak against it? You're not speaking for the right position, the right angle. And so therefore you are bigoted. That's where truth goes out the window for activism. But truth goes out the window for accusations too, when you're on one side or the other of something. But the only truth we can ever really know or really stand on is evidentiary truth. You know, this whole entire podcast it's a tentative standing for truth as far as it could be stood for, because I understand the postmodernist critiques of truth, the phenomenological critiques of truth. There's actually some truth to some of that stuff. I understand the pragmatist critiques of truth, But I still land in the realm of empiricism. It's pretty high up on that hierarchy over your activism or whatever, because I have a deontological position that the truth must be the truth, and we must not lie. We don't lie for an ends justifying the means. The truth will come out. The truth will make it correct. The truth is the answer to all these different issues. Even questioning what the problems are, we can't even really start with what the problems actually are, because we can't be truthful in this society. It's just all biases. But beyond that too, the attacks on Mormonism, when you're standing, I heard somebody describe it this week, saying that the ex-Mormon community is like that in Lehi's dream, the building that doesn't have a foundation. And I thought it was he was using it for something else, but I thought it was a great metaphor. I'm sure it's been used a bunch, but it's true. If you study postmodern philosophy, you can't say it's true. That's too much of a meta-narrative. If you study those things really all the way down, and I'm not talking about this like on the Jordan Peterson level. I've been in this game for years. I've read Lacan, I've read Deleuze, I've read Guattari, I've read, Derrida and Foucault. I've read all of them, not all of them. Gosh, it'd be impossible to read all of them. And it's impossible to read all of Derrida's stuff, and it's impossible to read all of. I might get to the end of Foucault, although I find it torturous now, and I don't straight out disagree with Foucault on everything. I think Foucault had a lot of good points, and even some points I got to a point of disliking Foucault so much that I stopped hearing what some of those points are. And I think some of them do have some ideas, but like anything, the issue is when they just go all the way down with it. That this just must be the only truth, or the only problem. They go all the way down with it in the sense of there can only be bias, and that's all there is in this world. There is no sorts of evidence or objectivity or Western concepts of fact finding or science. It's all biased. We're gonna get more and more into that as we keep going, but I hope I brought this all together. I should write scripts for these whole entire things. I just pulled up a bunch of things and I tried to piece them all together. This stuff's been on my mind for years. I hope this covers it well enough that I could just get it out and let it go. Because guess what, Dehlin, if you could figure out due process, because I understand sort of the concept that you're saying, that even mentioning this sort of stuff drags you. But I mean, that's part of the world that we're in. But it'd be from the start, it would have been a lot easier to defend you if you had the same principles you're begging for. You don't. You don't have the same principles. And the more you guys push and move into this left-wing activism, or fall into it, or be useful idiots for it, the more you take a dump on it. So I have to stand by mine. Null hypothesis. He said, she said. Dehlin, in my book, you're not guilty. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.